Hello and welcome to this episode of The Big Picture. Big Picture, Big Conversations. My name is Tom Mukhwana. I'm one of the three co-hosts that I usually sat on this bench today. But John Allen and Justine Wanda have somehow decided to abandon me today. But worry not, I'm not doing it alone today. I'm joined by an incredible guest, probably someone who has the biggest, or should I say the most gut-wrenching story in the country right now. But before we get there, this is a show about a lot of things. It's a show about system injustices that are aided by a system, injustices across the country and also to the youngest and most brittle people in this society, young girls and also young men in the streets who are murdered by police. The first part of this show is going to be dedicated to a story by Christine Mungai titled The Teacher and the System. It's a two-part investigation into sexual exploitation in one of the biggest schools in the land. And the second part, a brief part of this show, is going to be dedicated to the events that we witnessed yesterday at the Saba protests across the country. 17 counties witnessed protests and over 10 people were killed in the streets. The stories are still rolling out, and this is one of the stories that are still unraveling. But for this 1 hour, stay with us. And before we go even further, I don't have anything to say today. I'll just be part of this conversation and aiding it through. The main person in this conversation is going to be Christine Mungai. She's the editor at The Continent, and she's going to tell us more about herself and, most importantly, her story, the teacher, and the system. Christine, I don't even think I can do justice introducing you at this point.
You did a great job.
I did a great job, yeah?
Yeah.
But you work at The Continent right now, The Continent?
Yes, I'm the news editor at The Continent. We're a Pan-African weekly newspaper that covers the continent, and we mainly distribute our newspaper on WhatsApp. Yeah.
Brilliant paper, by the way. You should subscribe to them.
Yes.
But Christine, you're not here to speak about The Continent.
Yes.
However brilliant you guys are, you're here to speak about a piece that was published. Is it a week now?
Yeah. 4 days ago.
4 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it has over 1.5 million impressions on your Twitter. We haven't even gotten to the other tweets that were put out promoting the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a gut-wrenching piece.
Mm-hmm.
The details in the piece are harrowing. But you have a way with words, so you got everyone going to the next paragraph to the end. You've just told me that it was 17,000 words, but the people in this room didn't even notice that.
Yeah, that was just part one, which was 17,000, yeah.
So in total, how many words in both pieces?
I think I would say 25,000, something like that.
Around 25,000 words.
Yeah.
I don't think most people who are watching us right now have read it. And if they have, this is the first time that they're hearing you speak about this piece.
Yeah.
What is the teacher and the system about?
The story is, it's a 4-year investigation that I carried out into a pattern of abuse, a long-standing pattern, let me put it that way, centered at the school that I went to, my own alma mater, Alliance Girls High School. And I essentially dug into many testimonies and many stories of what appeared to be a very consistent and consistent pattern with one of the long-standing teachers there.
Yeah. And you start the piece, let me read it directly, how you wrote it. You said, I joined Form 1 at Alliance High School in February 2000.
Alliance Girls High School.
Alliance Girls High School in February 2000. Why did you start the piece like that? What a way to start an article.
Is it what a way?
Yeah, it's such a deep personal thing to say.
Yeah.
Start an article with, given the subject of the piece.
Yeah, I felt like I needed to immediately establish my cards that I'm coming to this as a journalist, but also as a member of that community, as an alumna, as a former student, as someone who had been through that same institution that I was now kind of shining a light on. It was important. I felt that it was important for whoever was reading to understand why I was coming into this, and to just establish my interest in this story in the first place, and also my perspective, my vantage point. Because as you know, in journalism, we can't actually be fully objective. I don't think objectivity is possible, but I think it's reasonable and fair to come into a story and to tell the reader where you're coming from. basically to state your interest in the story and the reason why you're pursuing it.
Yeah.
And that's why I start with my own story of joining Alliance, which was in the year 2000.
Yeah. And the last time we had a conversation was about something far less serious, the African Media Festival.
Yeah.
But then after you get into your story, the first paragraph, the second paragraph, it immediately starts getting darker and darker as you went by.
Yeah.
And what were experiences that you had?
You mean writing or?
Yeah, not writing, the piece and the things that resonated with you and the people that you centered this piece around.
Right. So when I was writing the story, I really tried to, what can I say, to take the readers on a journey. It was important to, because the people I quote in the story were on a journey themselves.
Yeah.
They had a starting point and then they had, where it went. And I felt like it was important to slowly walk with the reader. I felt like I was holding the hand of whoever was reading this. And I needed to really slow down in some places and establish some things so that people could understand the context.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the context of elite institutions, then some of the things that are in that story will be so bizarre and unbelievable.
Yeah.
But the reason why I call it the teacher and the system, and I even say it in the prologue, is that what happens systemically is very important to understand what happened to the individuals in the story. Yeah.
And what are the experiences of the people in the story?
Okay. So I interviewed more than 25 former students who gave me different pieces of this puzzle. I told everyone I spoke to that their perspective was important. As long as you were in the school during this time period, I think you had something to contribute. So different former students contributed different pieces of this story. And I tried to build the whole picture. It was like a join the dots puzzle.
Yeah.
Everyone's story was a dot. And in the end, I hope that we saw, the zoomed out picture. So what the interviewees basically told me, and which I write in the story, is basically zooming in on one particular teacher who was the long-standing drama patron and also the patron of the Christian Union. I start the story by explaining how I met him as a student. He was one of the first teachers that we met in our class. And basically just explaining the kind of relationship that he would typically have with students. Multiple former students describe him as friendly, approachable, not harsh like the other teachers mostly, someone you could have conversations with outside of academics, and so created this warm and friendly kind of atmosphere. And also because of his patronage of the CU, also created an image of kind of like what I can say, the role that he played in the school. As the CU patron was about, guiding the students' spiritual life, which is an important part of this story. But what was happening to some students is a lot more disturbing. Yeah.
What was happening to them?
So the piece basically uncovers a pattern of what I would say is emotional manipulation, sexual exploitation, and basically psychological abuse as well, especially in part 2 of the story. I think in summary, that's how I would put it.
Yeah.
There's also there are several, a number of instances of non-consensual physical contact with students, that for anyone who's reading, their alarm bells would immediately be going off. And how he got these students there, according to what I uncovered, was basically, number one, kind of having favorites, so giving special privileges to students like snacks and that kind of thing, which is super important in a boarding school environment. Anyone who's around teenagers knows this. And secondly, several teachers independently mentioned that he seemed to have a very close relationship with several principals over the years. which made them feel like reporting this would be futile or kind of blocked by, that administrative friction, I would say, that they perceived would happen if they reported this. Yeah.
And you mentioned that very elaborately in the piece. You say this is a piece about closing ranks to defend somebody who's exploiting young girls sexually, which is wrong in every way imaginable. But Alliance Girls High School is such a high-profile school. I think even when I was in primary school, when people remember those pages that you'd fill out applying to, should I call it applying really? Or would you call it applying at that time?
I would say it was applying.
Yeah. Alliance Girls High School always rank highly. It was next to so many big names. And to imagine that this has been happening for, was it over 25 years?
Well, the teacher has been in the school for 25 years, but the time frame that I investigated from the first account that I mentioned starts in 2006-07.
So that's 17 years. 18?
That's almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
To imagine that this has been happening for that long with nothing being done at all to this individual.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happened?
So I would say that from what I uncovered is that various people tried to do something over the years, but no one really got traction. And that's what I try and explain in the piece, how institutions failed in this case and really failed to protect the children. So in the prologue, when I talk about why I'm writing this as a journalistic piece, it's because I was coming to this to write a story about institutional failure, because these various attempts, whether informal or even a bit more formal, did not seem to get traction. And I was writing a story about how institutions fail, and I felt that at that point when I decided to do this as a journalistic piece, I was just doing this story for the record, basically to document that this happened and that people cared enough to try to do something, but they were not successful. Yeah.
And I want to get to the individuals, who are mentioned in the piece.
Yeah.
I read about them and what they were telling you at that time. And first of all, let's get to one specific individual, the person at the center of part 2, more. I really want to get into how her mind is right now. How does she feel about everything that's happening, and how did she process everything after it happened?
Yeah.
You spoke with her, I imagine.
Yes. And we've been in contact even after the story has been published.
Yeah.
I would say that, like I say in the story, Mo had to kind of go on her own healing journey and reconstruct her life in a way. But she's doing very good right now. She's doing so much better because, like I say in the piece, she's doing the work of how to process and how to deal with going through something that was so, personally damaging to her.
Yeah.
And the reason why she wanted this story out is just for the simple reason so that other girls don't have to go through this. Really, that's what she told me her motivation was.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be resolved, this problem, as it stands?
Well, I know that many different constituencies, let me call them that, are mobilizing around this.
Yeah.
I don't want to preempt anything that anyone is doing, but as you say, the story has gotten a lot of traction.
Yeah.
A lot of views, a lot of comments, a lot of visibility.
Yeah.
And I said that this is a story about institutional failure, but I'm hoping that this time round, institutions will act.
Yeah.
Maybe under the pressure of how big the story is right now in the public consciousness. But ultimately, I would say that investigating this for so long just made me realize that harm can be happening while people fail to do something about it. While we are going around in institutional circles, because in the story, I don't know if you noticed, in 2018, 2019, a group of old girls attempted to create a Big Sisters Club in the school, to basically sensitize the current students at that time, about boundaries, about healthy relationships and all that. But their initiative, I would say, largely failed.
Why?
And because of, I would say, resistance.
Within the institution itself.
Yes.
Okay.
It's either resistance or complacency, but essentially they were not able to do much. And while that was happening, the next girl in the story, Ruth, was a student at the time. So while these alumni are trying to save the children, there's a girl who is already
going through it.
Yes. Which is actually really, really heartbreaking when you think about it.
Yeah.
That's an active instance when there was an attempt to kind of find accountability and create a school that is safer.
Yeah.
But because it failed, another girl that I met that was in contact, that I ended up being in contact with, her time overlaps with this failure. Yeah.
And for me, I think one of the things that caught my eye and my attention, something that has stayed with me, is this pattern that has been established by this individual over so many years.
Yeah.
It mirrors itself across all these personal stories.
Yes.
So, and this is a two-part question.
Yes.
The first part is, could you explain how that pattern looks like? And the second part is, we've already seen, you mentioned it in the piece, that one of the people who survived this mentioned that this happens across so many schools, and her story can be replicated all over the country.
Yeah.
So first of all, you should address right now what that pattern looks like for somebody who hasn't read the piece.
Yeah.
Because some people might be meeting this piece from listening to you right now.
Yeah.
So could you establish in a few words how that pattern looked like over the years?
How the pattern looked like?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like I said at the beginning, a very warm, friendly, approachable, much beloved teacher, which is important in a high pressure environment like Alliance. Sometimes it's, everything is about academics, but then now there's this one person who is giving you more,
everything but academics,
and which is important to kind of like round out your life, because so much is about like just performance. So there's that.
Yes.
The other pattern that I establish in the piece is kind of how emotionally volatile he was to people sometimes. So hot and cold behavior, which some of the girls described as like very unpredictable. And if you are in his inner circle, and you saw how quickly he could shift on someone, it kind of creates a sense of anxiety in everyone else. And also in the person who kind of has been cast out. They're wondering, what did I do? What's going on? What's happening? And so you kind of try and win back the favor, right? So it's kind of like drawing them close and then kind of
pushing them away.
And also in a what seems to be a random or an unpredictable way for reasons that these girls don't understand. And as adolescents and even as adults right now, if someone does that to you, it's going to bother you. You're going to start ruminating on it and mulling on it and wondering what you did and what happened and trying to win this person back.
Yes.
Then the other pattern is, for many of the instances that I uncovered, was initiating a relationship, whether physical or sexual, fairly soon after these girls had left high school, where the power dynamic was still intact, in the sense of, yes, they're out of school, but they still see this person as an authority, as a mentor, as all these things, which actually makes this relationship or this experiences very unbalanced.
Yes.
And essentially that's what I would say is, constitutes this pattern. And then at the end of it is kind of how the institutions responded to this, because from what several teachers told me, I think that they picked up enough to know that something was wrong, but they all said that they didn't have evidence to act on. They didn't have hard evidence, which I think is not is understandable, I think, in that world from where they were standing. But at the end of the day is also not enough. That excuse is not enough when children's lives are at risk. And I hope the people will see that the piece establishes that children's lives are at risk, because for the grooming to start when you're in high school, or when this kind of like dynamic starts in high school, when you are actually a minor, by the time you're getting out of high school, that dynamic, that whole situation has kind of like, in the words of one of the girls that I interviewed, it's almost like curated or programmed your mind. Yeah. Adolescents' brains are very vulnerable, very sensitive, and also impressionable. I use the word impressionable because it's very easy to impress something upon a teenager's mind and give them this idea of things.
And you described it as breadcrumbing and is it bombing them with?
So breadcrumbing them is the hot and cold behavior of like giving affection and then withdrawing it, which creates that dynamic of wanting, to win back favor or to get back into favor.
Because I remember even one of the people in the piece, one of the girls, say that they owe a lot of how they think to him. So to imagine that this person did these things to you and you still imagine them, that it shows just how irreparable some of these damages are. And which leads me to the next part of the question. How does this leave those girls feeling afterwards?
I actually have realized I didn't answer your other question about
how far this is.
Yes. So since the piece was published, there's been a lot of conversations I've seen online, and folks coming forward and saying this was happening at my school too. This was happening with a teacher as well, and several schools and teachers have been mentioned. One of the girls that I interviewed in the piece called it a silent pandemic within our schools and churches and youth groups, which is actually the reality, and just how normalized some of these things are. There are people who read this story and don't see anything wrong. Which is what I've also seen in the responses, which is very sad when you think of how vulnerable that age bracket is, and how powerful that power dynamic is in really destabilizing someone's sense of reality. So I think anyone watching this, many people can relate to what is in the story. I think what is different with my piece is just how detailed and how I try to make the case for, putting together some dots and establishing a pattern.
What's worrying is that it's 2025 and these things are still happening across the country, and your piece is one of the first pieces to establish it very elaborately. It's actually very disturbing, and people close to me have told me that they saw the same thing happening in their schools. And I also saw the same thing happening in my primary school, not even secondary school. What is the role of TSC and the government? Because all these institutions have a stake in this. The buck stops with them. How do you see this being resolved? How would Christine and all these people who are influenced by this individual want to see this resolved in the end? Perfect ending for this whole situation.
Really the whole motivation for doing this story is to seek accountability and justice. And one of the ways to do that is to create safer environments for students in schools. And I think from the TSC or the government perspective would be to be more serious about safeguarding, and to also have a fuller view of what
Yeah.
power dynamics look like. It's not always so straightforward that, you know, we only respond when it's this kind of abuse or when it's this kind of situation. Just to be, you know, to have a more fuller and wholesome view about the different kinds of harm that can happen in an institution with, you know, like a school where there are minors, but they're also, you know, powerful adults.
Yeah.
And the adults are powerful simply because of their age, because they're adults, but also because they sit somewhere in the power structure of the school. So there are some laws in Kenya that specifically talk about teachers and single out teachers as one of the professions that kind of has a special responsibility for creating safe environments.
Yeah.
And so I think the TSC and our laws in Kenya already have something.
Yeah.
But we need to be more serious as a country when it comes to safeguarding minors and anyone in a vulnerable power dynamic.
Yes.
And we all know instinctively that, you know, this power dynamics is not just a thing that affects teenagers. Even in workplaces,
Yes.
there's a lot of sexual harassment. And, you know, our courts have actually put together some jurisprudence that actually, you know, gives that legal reasoning of why this kind of situation deserves this kind of structure or this kind of guardrails. Yeah. So I just think that the research is out there, the standards are out there, and then it just comes to a place of I would say really wanting to do this and being committed to, you know, changing some of our cultures so that, you know, our schools can be safer environments. Yeah.
Moving this further away from schools, there was a quote that, and I could transpose this into Kenya, that in America, it will affect you more legally. There's a bigger restriction into the killing of eagles and animals. Like, you'll suffer more if you kill an animal under the law than if you beat up a woman or if you sexually assault a woman. It's the same thing in Kenya. And Jeremiwi's Twitter profile is the place to go if you want to see how bad the problem is. Not only to high school students or students who are 13, like what I saw in my school, but even minors much younger than that. They're infants even, some of them, and the law doesn't do much to address this. And the society always has a way to excuse this. And you also detail that in your article, that I think his father, who's also a church leader, said that this has been resolved internally. Remember that part? But I'd like to ask some of the questions here that some of the audience asked here. Someone asked a very important question, actually. Murithi asks, did the institution have a clue on what was happening to their students? Should it be held accountable for not taking action?
Did they have a clue?
Yes.
I think I outlined in the article that they had a clue. Between the teachers and the administration, they had a clue. They may not have had all the details, but the fact that there was already a tacit kind of whisper network is already a sign that someone knew that something was seriously wrong. Multiple students have talked about how teachers would call them aside, tell them to be careful around this person, discourage them from, you know, being in the drama club, discourage them from taking the subject that he was teaching. That's enough.
Yes.
To show that there was a clue.
And these are, to go back to the point again, CU, drama club, the German club, I think even international exchange programs. These are places in school that are so sacred to teenagers and young people. And to have such a person invade these spaces and make them what he's made them, it's heartbreaking. The same person again asks, what measures can be taken by parents, guardians, or institutions to ensure minors are aware of predators or pedophiles in their presence? Very important question.
Yes. Like I said, I think we need a more holistic view of what safety is, what our safe spaces are. and how to keep teenagers safe. So I'll give you an example. One of the girls I interviewed, I don't put this in the story, but it's in my transcripts. She said that our parents would always discourage us, or rather we would always get these warnings about hanging out with boys or being with boys our age, right? But then she said, but our parents would never drive us to our boyfriend's house and leave us there for 3 months. What she was saying is that parents assume that churches and schools are the safest places, and they kind of withdraw girls, especially girls, from other kinds of interactions, which is okay, as you're trying to keep your teenage girls safe and away from the world. But those spaces that you by default assume are good or are the alternative have, their own kind of vulnerabilities and their own kind of dangers. And I think we should all be aware of this. You had Nanjala on the show a couple of weeks ago, Nanjala Nyabola, and in one of her books, she talks about how growing up in Nairobi, there's a certain age, when they were kids, they would play boys and girls in the estate, but there's a certain age when girls disappear from outside. You never see them outside ever again. Except when they're being sent to the shop or something like that. It's like girls are not allowed to hang out outside, which again is I guess fine to what parents are trying to do. But now after you've withdrawn them from what I would say public life, the only social spaces that they have is church and school. So I think parents need to be more critical about these spaces that they assume by default are safe. Because they have their own kinds of risks. And one of the major kinds of those risks is that default assumption
of safety.
Important
part you've just touched on that I want to get very deep into. The CU leader at that time was this individual who was preying on these teenagers. Alliance in itself is also a school rooted in the church.
Very Christian
school, right? What is the role of the church in all this, in protecting the individual?
I think this is a harder question for me to answer than the school one. And in the piece, I do try to intertwine those kind of two institutions and how they played out in this particular instance, because both spheres, I think, are arenas where people tried to get accountability, and in both arenas, they largely failed. For different reasons. But I think in the church space, I don't think churches are by default set up to think about this kind of thing. I think in churches we are kind of guided and taught and programmed to think about this in a different way, which is, let's pray for them. They're going through a tough time. Anyone can fall. We are all sinners. There's no big or small sin. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of kind of church language.
He's not a perfect man.
He's not perfect. He's led many people to,
a lot of excuses in my point of view.
So I think there's so much language and so many like kind of biblical narratives that are readily available to dismiss this, right? And because they're so salient in our consciousness, they're so easy to reach to because we're always hearing them all the time. It's so much harder to dig into the scriptures and to actually stand on, the kind of what can I say? The kind of perspective that unequivocally addresses this, But I would say that I'm really encouraged by how I've seen the response, even from folks I know who are pastors, who are church people. What can I say? They are more grounded and like more unambiguous that what happened here was wrong, shouldn't have happened. And I would say that, I think as Kenyans, we need to go through national soul searching, right? And this ties into, the next piece that you're going to have in this show when we talk about what's been happening in the country. A lot of that we see kind of brutality, dismissing people's lives and and all that, I think in some ways is kind of tied to our theology and our theological ideas, where we don't imagine that we deserve a good life and good governance here on earth. We are always deferring that to the afterlife, to later, to another government that will come, you know. But I think we just need to almost go to the gym. You know, we need to go to like a spiritual gym where we can build up some theological muscles that can push through and actually create, you know, space for imagining a better today, you know, and not just defer this to some unknown kind of future. The Bible in the gospel, Jesus says that I came so that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And you know, that idea of like we can imagine a better situation, or we can imagine freedom here and now, is I think something that we really need to grapple with. You know, we all know the story of the Good Samaritan, right? This person who met someone who had been beaten up on the road, and you know, two people passed him by, but the Good Samaritan stopped and took care of him and, you know, nursed him back to health, right? Which is great. But if you notice that people are always being beaten up on this road,
fix something.
Why don't we go upstream and figure out where the robbers are hiding? I think as Kenyans, we are happy to do the downstream work. We fundraise for different things. But going upstream to stop the harm, it's like standing in a river. I saw someone using this analogy: stand in a river and bodies are just floating down, and you take them out, and you know, the ones who have hope, you resuscitate them, the others you bury them. But no one goes upstream to figure out who's killing people. And I think that's what we need to do, and we can't do that if you don't have the kind of spiritual fortitude that can get you up there and figure out what the hell is going on.
And also agency. I think you have to, it's the easier thing to do. It's the easier thing to say things like, it's a spiritual battle, let's fight it spiritually, because it takes just going to church and praying and
or let these girls find their healing, that kind of thing. Which is okay.
It's okay in itself. Yes, but it keeps this thing happening because it's this individual who's preying on these teenagers that you're healing at that time is still doing the same thing to more people. It's in
There'll be more teenagers next year.
There are more bodies down the river tomorrow. Another question here that was asked: what is the way forward? I think you addressed some of that. But then the second part is really important. This person says Alliance Girls High School has produced some of the most brilliant minds in different fields. Very true. Imagine what would happen if we can't hold him accountable. What of the girl in that day and boarding school in my rural area? I want to help draft a public interest litigation. This is Nina Meraki, so I think you can get in touch with them.
I will get in touch.
Yes, you should get in touch with them. But a lot is already moving in the Alumni Association. Could you tell us some of that?
I don't want to talk too much about that because other people are kind of running with this after reading the story. But I'm hoping that what comes out of this is not just for Alliance, because this is not a story just about my high school. Yes, it's a story that has, national implications. My friends in Uganda are reading and retweeting this and calling me as well.
Do they relate to it?
Absolutely. So I think what the real motivation is here is not just for a particular institution in a particular moment. It's having the kind of reform that would impact that girl in that village school as well.
And someone here says this, Mweru Mwingi says, this story is disturbing, and more so in a school like AGHS, which is expected that administrative systems work perfectly well. That's clearly not what's happening. Lisa Mums says the teachers, support staff, the PTA, and the board all failed. Do you agree with that?
Say that again?
The teachers, the support staff, the PTA, and the board all failed.
I would agree with that, with the caveat that I think it was not always
Yeah.
Actively.
Yes.
It was also passively by, what can I say? Because I think institutions have their own character and their own energy and their own way of doing things. And sometimes you can be in a situation where to you, you're saying, I'm following due process, but you're not zooming out enough to see what the impact of that in multiple spheres actually produces. Yeah. That maybe the way I see it is that a lot of people who could have taken action had quite a narrow view of, and also a limited narrow view of what that would entail for themselves personally, but zooming out to actually figure out my own, so
Very true.
I think it's a failure of perspective. Let me put it that way. I think it was a failure of perspective.
I would you're a lot kinder with your words. I'd argue differently. Because in another article was it after publication, detailing the court issues that you encountered right before publication, you mentioned that you entered a certain meeting. And in that meeting, they tried to kill the piece. That doesn't look like someone who...
They asked that we delay the story or stop the story. Yeah, they did. They did ask.
Could you tell us about that meeting? And
so again, like I say, you know, like I say, institutions have a very interesting character. Like every institution has its own vibe. And at Alliance and in any elite institution, there's a very strong knee-jerk reaction to protect the image of the school and the name of the school. And so that self-preservation instinct kicked in. I knew that it was going to kick in. It was just very interesting watching it happen. Because on one hand, the board was, you know, shocked, concerned, horrified, but at the same time was asking me to delay or drop the story.
They're trying to save face.
Or buy time or, you know, something. But I keep saying a story like this goes on for 20 years because of that instinct. To save face, to not rock the boat, to preserve, to preserve, kind of like maintain the peace, to not be the one to stick your neck out, to assume that someone else will do something about it. And when everyone thinks like that, then no one does.
No one does anything.
And then this, you know, that instinct of like preserving ends up harming people.
The same thing keeps happening over years.
Correct.
Eric Ochieng says Kenyans don't understand the church. In fact, the only Kenyan who understands the church is Gaido. We will move on to the next comment. Well, he is right, actually, because the church is used to manipulate people. Away from the school even politically, the church is used as an instrument to manipulate people and do what somebody of a higher power, or like you say, this power dynamics, these remain the same in some parts because of the church. Jacqueline Kubania says, great job. Did you attempt to reach out to TSC for the story? And how did you envision holding duty bearers accountable for the lack of oversight that has entrenched these systemic failures in schools?
So I did reach out to the school. I felt that reaching out to TSC would, what can I say? I was hoping that once the story is published, then we could get, you know, interest, energy, pressure. I need to say something that all through investigating this story, and the many people who tried to intervene over the years can attest to this, there's always this strong impression that that it was futile to try. You understand? So I think in some ways it just like preemptively discouraged anything, because even the folks who kind of, you know, wrote letters, you know, tried to do something about it. Institutions did not respond the way they thought that they should. And they came away feeling very disappointed and feeling very defeated. Let me just say, a lot of people that I interviewed for this story were actually very defeated and very sad, and like they had reached the end of their rope. They had done their little thing in their little corner that did not seem to get the results that they were hoping for. Yeah. And so in some ways, what I was writing, I wasn't writing it from a place of like rage or emotions or like anger.
Yeah.
The real emotion that I felt while I was writing this was grief and sadness. I was writing a sad story.
Yes.
It was a story of failure.
And to add on that, just to piggyback on exactly what you've said,
yeah.
How have your experiences influenced how you wrote this piece?
My experiences?
Yes, your experiences.
I think I can only answer that in one way, which is generally speaking, I'm quite a melancholy temperament. There are times I really can sit into like grief and and so when I noticed that this story was not a triumphant I wasn't writing the kind of story where it's it was documenting something that was building up to like some kind of triumphant finish. It was actually a story that was going down, which ends with this is all that people attempted and this is all the failure that we have to sit with. And now we have to decide, by we, I mean the community, the readers, the society, we have to decide what to do with this now. I think that's what I can say kind of fed into that. Also the fact that writing this just took so long.
How many years?
4 years.
4 years.
It just, I mean, I came up against so many roadblocks. I can't even tell you how much failure I personally experienced.
Yeah, I want to get into that. I want to get
much.
exactly into that as we move on to the next topic. What obstacles, what hurdles did you face?
Well, one hurdle is, the case that you mentioned. That was a huge, gigantic one towards the end. But I think all along the way, it was hard. Like I say it in the story, I talked to many former students. Many former students did not respond to me, ghosted me, agreed to interviews and dropped out. And all of them expressed this sense of futility. It's not that they didn't have something to say or something to share. It's that they didn't believe that this was worth it. For whatever reason, including the feeling that they didn't feel like their voice would matter. Because they had experienced over the years different ways of feeling like they don't matter. So because of that, and also because of the nature of this story, this story is so personal and so sensitive for so many people. You're talking about the kind of things that Kenyans don't feel comfortable discussing.
Yes, because they have to look inward.
Exactly. And then there's also the fear of like, how will people read this? Will they blame me? Will they understand? So I was coming up against a lot of resistance. And then some of the resistance I outline in that little note that talks about how the school board responded, that talks about the gag order, and also talks about like how that court case was resolved with the ruling last Friday, which allowed us to publish.
A few more comments, then we get on to the next topic. Someone says here, hiyo maneno ya kunyoa watoto wasichana, so they are less appealing to predators in 2025. Shule zikome. Young girls are not the custodians of male morality. That's absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Lilian Oteno says, thanks, Chris, for pushing through with the story and sticking your neck out for so many girls affected. And that's something that I've had even with people close to me. How people are so proud of your bravery throughout this, the writing the piece, facing the court, and then coming out in the end with this difficult to read story that we have now. And finally, Priska Njuguna says, Christine, you are a warrior. Your tenacity made all the difference. Thanks for the sensitivity and precision with which you wrote this piece. So many hugs sent your way.
Thank you, Priska. Thank you.
Priska, thank you so much. But where does this leave Christine feeling before we get to the next topic?
Yeah, where does it leave me feeling? I think I would say that the work is far from over. Getting this story published was this immense hurdle that we had to get over. And so there's that sense of relief. But also there's the sense of feeling a bit overwhelmed, especially by the response, by all the flurry of everything that's happening. But like I say, I think the work continues. As they say, a luta continua. This story was in the public interest, which means that the story is not over until the public interest is solved, which includes the standards, the safeguarding, the reform that we need, that will not just reform Alliance Girls, but will reform, schools around the country. And I dare to believe that can happen. Yeah.
I think it's the only result that will resolve everything down the road.
Yeah.
Because focusing this on Alliance Girls, and I love that people have moved, a few people have moved away from this one individual and are trying to look at this bigger systemic issue. And so many schools have come up with similar patterns, right?
So many schools.
I think in the end, what we should all see is it's already a knee-jerk reaction, because TSC should have been involved from the beginning. The school board should have taken this to the highest offices possible. But they closed rank and they assisted this individual and kept him within this and confined, safe area, which perpetuated the same thing, because until March this year, is it March or May actually? The same individual was still the CU patron and was still teaching in this school. Well, now from the alumni, I've seen that he's been interdicted to some degree.
A process has begun, is what they're saying.
Initiated, right? Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But then there should be a way girls can feel safe in school to report such things when they happen.
Yeah.
Sex ed is one thing.
Yeah.
But then you have to go a mile further to show them that this thing can happen to you, not at home only, but also in school. And also parents need to learn how to, I don't think they can spot these things when they happen. Do you think they can? But I think there should be levels to which this can be reported and escalated and action taken swiftly.
Yeah.
But it's Kenya, and again, systems don't work in this country. Do you have anything to add before I get to the next thing? Because I want to get deeply into politics now.
Oh my Lord.
Saw yesterday.
So I think in the story I'm really careful to show the dots, right? And which means that this is a complex issue. There's not like one blanket solution.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that we all have a part to play in this. And one of the most powerful things that we can do is just normalize talking about some of these issues. And also, realize that teenagers are, although they are minors, they are also not children, which means that they can hear some of the things that we keep trying to protect them from. And in some ways, that some version of that sheltering and that naivety makes them vulnerable to certain kinds of intimacy and certain kinds of affection that they're not prepared for, that no one ever told them is a problem. And one of my interviewees said that by the time she was realizing that this was wrong, it was already escalating. And this is while she was still a student, right? And so also there's a level of silencing that I think we all need to reckon with. Why is it that we imagine that young girls are kind of guilty of something already? What that comment said about, like, the girl is the one who has to, what can I say, carry the burden of not being visible in certain ways, which really internalizes it makes girls internalize the idea that it's not that what is happening to them is wrong, It's that they did something to attract this kind of
It's
attention.
their fault.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that just, that's the shame, that's the silencing that just keeps going on and on and on.
It's the same thing. And I think people who are watching would, and you can even tell me if this is true, but someone close to me told me that in their school, they had to wear skirts a certain length, they had to wear shirts a certain size, and they had to shave and keep their hair a certain way to keep away the male gaze. And it was always turned against them. You're the one who's attracting this attention, when in actuality it's the male teacher who's saying these inappropriate things and doing these inappropriate things to girls. It's systemic gaslighting, right?
Yes.
And it happens in so many schools. But we've spoken about this for an hour, Christine. Let's get into what happened yesterday. Tragic. If anything, there's nothing we're going to be speaking about on this show, which is nice, unless this case is won in the end and this person is interdicted permanently and faces the full wrath of the law. Secondly, what we witnessed yesterday, Saba, maandamano all over the country, 17 counties witnessed protests, and Nairobi CBD was essentially on lockdown. We had to postpone this show, actually. We were supposed to be here same time yesterday, but we were afraid we wouldn't get back home safely. The things we saw on the streets yesterday, the people who were murdered, and have you seen the clip of a police officer and another one dragging a body across the street into a police station?
Yeah.
10 people at the end of the day were killed.
Yeah.
A good number of them headshots, which again raises bigger questions about why they were murdered. If it was targeted, I believe it was targeted. You don't hit someone in the head 5 times out of 10 and it becomes by accident. It doesn't happen like that. But I also saw another clip of a police officer saying, nimepewa ruhusa kukuua wewe, unataka kulala kwa fridge. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's so triggering. But the same thing that he's saying we witnessed on TV, but this cabinet secretary kept denying, Kipchumba Murkomen, the CS for Interior, he denied that he gave a shoot to kill order, but it's the same thing this police officer was saying in the streets. What did this tell you yesterday? I know this piece came with a lot of emotions and it's been weighing heavy on your head, but what did yesterday make you feel?
Yeah, for me, I just see it as part of the same continuum of how systems fail to recognize our humanity.
Yes.
So in some ways, what happened at Alliance, is in a way, just reducing students into grades or into data points in a way, right? And not really honoring people's individual experiences and making them feel like their voice matters and what happens to them matters. Yeah. It's more like you need to suppress yourself in the service of this institution. The same thing that I got, like, hey, what happened to these girls is terrible, but let's think about the institution. And I think our political leaders actually act in the same way. It's like, your life doesn't matter. What matters is this other thing that dehumanizes you, and you're only important as a voter. That's when your data point matters.
The economy matters.
The economy and property.
And businesses.
And businesses matter more than you. And I just think it's part of the same kind of systemic harm. Yeah. That as Kenyans, we are constantly living under. Our institutions don't see like we matter.
Yes.
When Kipchumba Murkomen said, if anyone approaches a police station, shoot them. I'm just like, why do police stations exist in the first place?
It's like the same people you're shooting.
Exactly. And I'm like, why would people be approaching a police station? Maybe to report a crime, maybe to get some kind of help, But it's like the police station matters more than your problem, more than you. It's like, now this is not here to serve you. Yeah. Which is really, it's a form of like violence that is actually quite difficult to articulate in the Kenyan context because of how normalized it is.
It's so normalized.
Like systemic violence is so normalized in this country.
And I was saying this to someone yesterday, that the same thing that we're witnessing across the country is something that people in informal settlements have existed under for so many decades. Extrajudicial killings, people being murdered and due process not being taken. But we're now becoming aware of it. And I think this is a good thing, because the more awake Kenyans are all over the country of what's happening, the easier it is to in one voice, search for better. And one of those things that we need to search for is actually IEBC. Exactly what people have been saying, constitute IEBC, and there's a whole hullabaloo with IEBC, and you've seen the post and them saying that their systems are under maintenance, blah, blah, blah. 2027 around the corner. I was watching a documentary about YK92 earlier today, and the similarities with what we're seeing in Gunnery right now.
Yeah.
It's so astounding.
So YK92 were the goons of 1992.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
From what I saw, is that they were mobilized by the former president, now the late Moi. And at that time, 1992 elections, he felt like he was losing because of Ford and DP being such a strong force among the youth. And so these businessmen, quote unquote, came together to mobilize youths to rally for Moi.
As goons.
Allegedly. And then they would storm meetings, they would...
goon behavior?
Goon behavior, exactly. They would storm meetings and they would terrorize people and make it hard, and even sometimes resort to violence.
Yeah, make it impossible.
To mobilize.
To mobilize, yeah.
Yes. And so these same people have then benefited at that time, allegedly, from loot acquired through Goldenberg at that time. And he said that Kamlesh Patni gave, allegedly, 11 billion, from what I saw, to fund YK92 and their behavior. Now, take that from 1992, bring it to 2025. A lot of corruption is happening. This money is allegedly flowing from the highest levels down to the MCAs, and they're dishing out this money, allegedly.
Yeah.
And then these people, goons, show up in places and terrorize protesters with the assist of police officers, which is the same thing that was happening at that time.
Yeah.
And the person who was giving the testimony in 92 was at that time the comptroller of State House, the speechwriter of the president at that time. The same thing that we're seeing right now. These people get a brief and the police officers protect them and work side by side with them. And you'd remember right before the June 25th protests, these people had machetes, some had arrows in other places in the country. Most of them had clubs, and some of them had tear gas. Some of them even had guns, reportedly. I think what we saw yesterday is a descent into further dictatorship. And someone said that we are the country we used to see on Al Jazeera and CNN in turmoil. Now we are the repeated
in turmoil.
News item in international media. But 10 people, and the week before that, 20 people. And this number is expected to go high, over 500 people arrested. But somehow the Ministry of Interior is more concerned about the 52 police officers who were injured, less than the 10. They're more concerned about those officers injured than the 10 people that they murdered. And it's so dehumanizing that up until early today, a mother of a youth who was murdered brutally was still trying to get the kid taken into a morgue.
Yeah.
Because the police were trying to stop that so that they could clear the evidence that shows their complicity. It's just mind-blowing.
And today I saw a mother whose 12-year-old daughter was shot in her house. Like, this girl was at home. She was not protesting, but stray bullet, And this is one of those things that is like so heartbreaking. You might start to think that, this is because of protest. This is because of Mandamano. But on Sunday, mothers were having a press conference at Kenya Human Rights Commission. That was not a Mandamano. That was not a protest. It was a press conference. And, these goons came and disrupted the whole thing in such,
disrupted everything, stole a few things, beat them up, and terrorized them back into the building.
Right.
To imagine that this is happening, and I guarantee you that as much as those, and they also invaded a hospital while a C-section was happening.
Unbelievable.
It's crazy. I guarantee you that the government will be more preoccupied with the people who are under arrest and try to get them, because I think some were bailed out with 50%, 50,000 Kenya shillings. The government will be more concerned with getting these people arrested and charged and just suffocating them with legal issues more than arresting these people who stormed that hospital, people who terrorized these women, and people who went with arrows into protest to try and disrupt peaceful demonstrations. They will try to make this a bigger issue, that people showed up in the streets and that they were protecting the city more than they will be concerned with arresting these police officers who killed these people. We've become so normalized to seeing people shot in the streets with blood oozing from their head. It's just incredibly, should I say, worrying, angering, upsetting, triggering. You can use all those words to describe this. But Christine, asante sana kwa kuja. Let me just go on YouTube to see. Wow, yes, a few more comments. To wrap it up, Lillian Otieno says, a big thank you to Africa Uncensored too for walking this journey with us through the story and giving it visibility. Asanteni sana. Kabon says, thank you so much, Christine, for keeping at the story even when you faced roadblocks. Thank you for bringing this to light. Sarah Kenyi says, as a believer and honestly a lover of Jesus Christ, I hope the spiritual guardians of this generation are feeling as trained as they ought. Ignoring this once more will be a message in itself. Very profound. And then she says, Christine, you have made me learn that I must speak up for my children, for their sake, and an honest conversation on church governance structures needs to be had. Asante sana, Sarah, Lilian Otieno, Kabon, Priska, Joel, Gail, Eric Ochieng, Jacqueline Kubania, and all the other 166 of you who are still on this stream. Christine, I was about to say Justine. Christine, in 1 minute, please, is there anything we've missed in this conversation? I would hate to leave it without.
I just want to say that I worked on this as a freelance journalist for 4 years until I shared this with John Allen Namu of Africa Uncensored, and then he made the decision for Africa Uncensored to publish this. So I was actually, I was published by Africa Uncensored as a freelancer. And I just want to thank Africa Uncensored for taking this up. It was a tricky and heavy story that needed a lot of editorial support. And I had been working alone with it single-handedly for a very long time. But when I was finally able to get that editorial support and institutional support is what actually allowed us to carry this through to the finish line, that finish line push, and especially carrying this through the court injunction. I don't think it would have been possible if I didn't get the support that I got from this place. So please tell your people thank you.
They're here. Thank
you, guys. And it was really a pleasure, and I felt, when Africa Uncensored came in to actually publish, it was that, that final sprint as you've been doing a marathon, and then that last 500 meters when you need to run and sprint. I think I made it to the finish line because of the support that I got from this place. So asanteni.
Oh, karibu sana, Christine. We honestly just so honored that you trusted Africa Uncensored and that this conversation is hardy and filtered. Peter Mbugua Njoroge says, where can I access the investigative report? Peter, you can find it on Substack. I think our social media manager has pasted it in this comment section, but you might have joined way after. So if you can paste it, he will, but it is available on all our social platforms. It's linked there, but it's natively published on Substack. 2 parts, right, Christine?
Yeah, two parts, part 1 and part 2.
Yes, it's a gut-wrenching read, honestly, but thank you so much, Christine, for writing that, for taking your time with it, for featuring all these voices. And it would be remiss if I did not thank the people who shared these stories with you, because had it not been for their bravery and their courage while you asked these questions and how deeply personal they were, despite it all, they shared them with you, and that's where we got to know of it.
Exactly.
But then at the end of the day, the onus, not the onus, but the buck stops with TSC, from my view, where I sit. And it's for everyone who has any sort of power to influence what's happening to these young, vulnerable girls to change this thing that is happening across this country, which is nefarious and dirty. I think they don't think there's any more, there's another more damaging word than dirty. It is dirty, it is unacceptable, and it is, should I say, criminal, as much as this gentleman somehow found loopholes which allowed him to operate and not be trapped in legal issues. But then 4 years of investigation, the teacher and the system is out, 2 parts of it. Christine, is there part 3? You said there was.
Oh man,
You said there was.
well, so a lot is happening right now. I don't know what the future holds.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in what comes next,
Yeah.
especially institutionally. So maybe part 3 is about what's happening right now within the institutions that you mentioned.
Yeah. I hope to see this gentleman behind bars. I hope to see him behind bars, and I hope to see a lot more of these stories come out. You have an email that you've shared with people across all platforms. Please tell us about it.
So the reason why we set up that email is because we are very aware that all we gathered was just a fraction.
Yes.
Not just at Alliance, but also nationally. There's so many other stories like this, and so many other people hold different parts of this puzzle, different parts of this story. And so we set up this email where people can write in with their reflections, with more information, with their comments. And the email is 109walkinthe_light@pm.me. It's actually at the bottom of both the stories. So if you have any information to share, whether you're a former student, a parent, just a member of the public, if the story resonates for you in some way with your own experience, with your own school, just write into that email, and then we will carry it forward from there.
Just say it one more time.
109 Walk in the Light.
Walk in the Light.
At pm.me.
109 Walk in the Light at pm.me.
Yeah.
It's secure, right?
Yes.
Because
it's a secure email address.
It's a secure email.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Christine, for coming. Asante sana to all 146 of you who are still watching us. The Big Picture will be back next week. You'll find this exact episode with Christine available on Spotify and all the other podcast platforms that you use. But thank you so much for staying with us. I hope you have a good night, and see you on the next one.